Thank you, everyone, for coming today. I'm Bob Kanauer, and today's program we're going to talk about electric cars, and we're going to go through the history of electric cars, talk about some electric vehicles that are available today, production vehicles, what the charging options are, and also we're going to take a little field trip out to the parking lot. We have, some of you may know, Penfield has a charging station here at the community center that was put in April, and my company donated the equipment. The town installed it with their facilities department, and donations pay for the cost for the electricity for the charging station. To date, I know my Chevy Volt is plugged in there now. There's been a number of Nissan Leafs out there, which is an electric car, and also a Mitsubishi electric car. And we can talk about, some of those. First, a little bit about my company. I started my company in 2008. It does solar PV, photovoltaic, and that's basically solar panels that people can have on their house, in their yard, that can save their electric bill cost. We have a number of installations around the county, out in Wayne County. There's a number in Penfield, and in fact some of the ones in Penfield are what are considered net zero, where there's no electric bill cost. The panels provide 100% of the electric power for their house. Recently, in the last year, I got into electric vehicle charging stations. We'll get into these. These are a couple of different models here. There's a third one, like I said, out in the parking lot that we can take a look at. As far as the history of electric cars, can anybody guess when the first electric vehicle was actually invented? She doesn't count.
Probably early 1900s.
About 1890 or 1900.
Pretty close. Actually, the first, and they called it a model, was in 1828. A scale model was invented by an inventor in Hungary. In Scotland, Robert Anderson invented an electric-powered carriage in 1835. And around that same time in Vermont, there was another gentleman that invented the first American-built electric car. So it goes back, it's not a new technology. The inventors were working on electric vehicles actually before the internal combustion engine, which is surprising. As far as history in the US, the first ones that were really available as production models were in the late 1890s, 1900. And in fact, in 1900, the electric cars outsold gas and steam cars. They were very popular in the cities. A lot of the cars were actually driven by women. One of the reasons being that the early gasoline cars, you had to start with a hand crank. With the electrics, all you had to do was turn a switch on and you were good to go. Also, physicians would use electric cars in the cities. And there's a picture here of Woods Electric. You can see it's pretty basic, looks more like a little carriage, but that was in 1902. And it was the same person, Woods, actually invented in 1916 the first hybrid car, which had an internal combustion engine and an electric motor in the car. The electric vehicle production peaked in 1912, and by 1920, the electric started to decline, and it was due to a number of factors. The road system became better. Cars were used for longer distance driving. The electrics had limited range, so they were basically urban type vehicles. The discovery in Texas of crude oil reduced the cost of gasoline, so that made fueling gasoline cars a lot less expensive. And then we get to the invention of the electric starter by Charles Kettering. So now most anybody could get into a car and start the car with a switch. And then the cost, it was really the start of Henry Ford's mass production methods that by the 1920s, the cost of an electric car would be about $1,750 versus about $650 for a gasoline car. So now we fast forward to 1960, and there was a resurgence, a return of electric cars. Part of it was due to problems with exhaust emissions, pollution in cities, and some companies started to come up with alternative methods of cars using electric. Some of the earlier ones, there was the Bitronic electric truck in '64, the Seabreg Vanguard city cars, the L car, American Motors Company also produced a number of delivery Jeeps. I think it was somewhere around 300 for the US Postal System. And through 1960 to 1990, there were different manufacturers that were trying different things with electric cars. In 1990, what really pushed it even further was a renewal of the electric vehicle development, which was driven by the 1990 Clean Air Act amendment and the 1992 Energy Policy Act. And around that time period, there may be some cars listed there that you might recognize. The electric car, which was a Chevy S10 conversion, a Selectra Geo Metro conversion. Those were actually, the conversions were done in Canada. And just last week I saw one. There's a group in Rochester that meets once a month, an electric car club. And there was an owner that brought a Selectra there, which was kind of an interesting car, one of the earlier ones. And she drives it all around the city, plugs it in a regular 120 volt outlet at night. And I believe that was probably a 1995, 1996 model. There was a Ford Ranger electric. A lot of people have heard about the GM EV1. Toyota made an electric minivan, the RAV4. Early on, Honda made an EV plus sedan. There was a Chrysler minivan. And also Nissan had a vehicle, an Ultra EV station wagon. And there's many others that were out there. Different companies tried different things, but they were pretty low production numbers, pretty much specialized kinds of vehicles. Today, I'll talk about some of the ones, and this really started in 2010. The Chevy Volt was first available in 2010. It was available in upstate New York in early 2011. And the Chevy Volt has both an electric motor for using batteries for the first 45 miles or so. And then if you, they call it a range extender, but there's a internal combustion engine in the car that if you deplete the battery and don't charge it, and you have your tank full, you can drive for another 350 miles. So you don't really have just a limitation of the electric charge. That's the vehicle that I have. I've got about 8,500 miles on the car now. I've had it about a year. About 1,000 miles were put on it using gas, the rest by electric. So I haven't put gas in that car in 6 or 7 months. The Nissan Leaf has been out last year, but again in this area, it was first available early in the spring. There's been some that have been parked out here at our charging station. The Nissan Leaf is 100% electric, and that has about a 60 to 70 mile range before you need to recharge that car. The Mitsubishi Electric is also 100% electric. That's a little bit smaller car. And price-wise, it's about $10,000 less than the first two. Again, because it's a smaller car, it does have a back seat, but it's a pretty small back seat. Just recently, the Toyota Prius plug-in came out. The Prius plug-in has about a 12-mile range on the electric, but the gasoline engine on that hybrid will kick in if you go above 35 miles per hour. So if you're just doing slow city driving, you can get some advantage of being 100% electric, but at faster speeds, the engine is going to kick in. The other car, well, the Chevy Volt, you can go top speed in that car as long as you have a battery charge. The engine will never go on. The Ford Focus Electric just appeared in Rochester last week or the week before last at Van Bortle Ford in East Rochester. That's a dealer that was designated in this area to carry the Ford Focus Electric. I had an opportunity to drive that car, and that one has maybe a little bit longer range than the Nissan Leaf, maybe 80 to 90 miles on a charge. The next generation Ford Focus Electric, my understanding, will have close to a 200-mile range. And with all of these vehicles, as the technology improves with primarily battery technology, probably within the next 5 to 10 years, there will be electrics available that will have a 300 to 400-mile range. So it's like any other technology. It takes a while to establish. You get production numbers up, and then the breakthroughs take place as far as the technology and cost. The last two here, if you have a lot of money, There's the Tesla Roadster and the Fisker Karma. These cars are over $100,000. They look like sports cars. So that's probably something like the movie stars would get these cars. But there is the Fisker Karma Dorschel is a dealer in Rochester that has the Fisker. The Tesla, I think it may be the closest is Buffalo, where that car is available. Talking about advantages and disadvantages for electric vehicles, the foremost probably advantage with an electric vehicle, your fuel, which is the electricity for the car, is very economical because you aren't powering an internal combustion engine. So it's 400 to 600% more efficient than a gas-powered car, which means that for a given amount of energy that you're putting into it, you're getting 400 to 600% of the equivalent range. As most people may know, the internal combustion engine, a lot of the byproduct is heat. Probably 70% of the gasoline that's burned is just given off as heat, and that's wasted. So you're only really using 30% of the energy. With electrics, there's little or no pollution. Obviously, the vehicle is not emitting any emissions. But because you are using the electric grid in most cases to charge the car, most of the electricity is going to come from a coal-fired plant or a natural gas plant, something of that nature. But even given that, the amount of pollution from the electricity from a power plant coupled with the economy of the fuel itself is going to be a lot less than if you're burning a single, if you're getting emissions from a single engine. There's less vehicle maintenance if it's a pure electric. There's no oil changes. You don't have to worry about fuel systems. It's basically batteries and the electric motor. Of course, you still have tires and brakes. And it's a lot quieter in operation. Some disadvantages. Right now, the big disadvantage is cost. There are some tax credit programs out there that help with the purchase price, but they're still fairly expensive. Like I mentioned, the range, you can go 50 to 100 miles typically on a charge. So if it's a pure electric, you have to plan your trips or you'll run out of electricity and then you'll have to call a tow truck. In this area, there's still a small number of public charging stations. Just recently, it was announced that in Monroe County, the city of Rochester got a NYSERDA grant to put in, I believe it was 28 charging stations that will be at some parking garages in the city, will be at the public market, at City Hall, and I think up by the Port of Rochester in those locations. And one of the disadvantages, even though on the other page it was an advantage, is some say it's too quiet from a safety standpoint. If you're approaching intersections where there's crosswalks, you have to be a little bit careful because people are used to hearing the engines operating and you don't have that noise. So the future of electric vehicles, definitely the price is going to be reduced as time goes on. There will be longer ranges, distance ranges on a charge. As time goes on, there will be more public charging stations available. And some of the predictions show that in the next 10 years, the electric vehicles will significantly displace gas vehicles that are out there. Now, a little bit about charging stations, and we don't want to get too technical, but they're basically categorized into 3 levels. A level 1 plugs into a standard electrical outlet, and most of the cars that you buy, it comes with the 120 volt charger, and this is the one that comes with the Chevy Volt. So it plugs into a regular outlet, and then this connector goes in to the side of the car where it charges. And with a charger like this, if you need a full charge, this charger will easily do it overnight. So a lot of people, having a charger like this is more than adequate, because they'll go out during the day. Maybe where they work, they have a charger, or maybe distance-wise, they don't need it. And then when the car comes home at night, they just use a charger like this. A level 2 charger is a little bit more powerful. It's connected to a 240 volt AC power, kind of like your electric dryer, if you have an electric dryer. You can get those for home, and also the commercial chargers are level 2s. This charger is a commercial level 2 charger that can be mounted on a pole or a pedestal, and these chargers can be set up so they'll actually, you can swipe a credit card and plug in and pay for the charge that way. So the chargers that are going to be out in the public, there's going to be some that you'll have to pay for. Some businesses are putting them in and not charging any money for use of them, with the hopes that the customers will attract more customers and maybe stay in their store a little bit longer. And chargers like this will charge a car in about 3 to 4 hours if you needed a full charge. Now, most likely when people are driving around and they're using these chargers, they aren't necessarily going to be trying to get a full charge, but they may decide, or they may just want to top off their charge or gain a few miles. So if there's some distance from home and maybe they figure they're short 5 or 10 miles in electric charge, then they'll just plug into the charger to kind of add that to their capacity for the use. And the last type of charger, or level 3, it's a higher voltage DC charger. The only car right now that has that option is the Nissan Leaf, and that will completely charge the car in less than 30 minutes. So it's a quick charge, but the disadvantage of that is right now with the battery technology, if you use that type of charger too often, it will shorten the battery life in the car. And I should point out, all of the cars, there seems to be right now an industry standard where they are guaranteeing the batteries in the car for 8 years. So if the batteries should fail before then, they will be replaced. And it's not prorated, it's a 100% replacement. So I'm sure the manufacturers thought that that was going to be one of the big drawbacks. So they developed the cars so that the batteries, in fact, would have a longer life. Now, one of the things that my company has done, we installed a charging station on the right in a garage, and this is in Penfield off of Scribner Road. And the client here, she wanted enough solar panels on her house to drive her car 12,000 miles per year. So what you see, this is a system now that when she comes home with her car and plugs it into the charger, over the period of a year, there's enough energy from the solar panels to drive that car 12,000 miles per year. So she's not even using the electricity from the grid, per se, for charging the car. Now, the system itself, I should explain, it is a grid tie system, so the sun doesn't have to be shining for her to charge her car. But what it does is, when the sun is shining, it credits her electric at retail rate when the panels are operating. And then when we ran through the calculations, what she's actually using then, any time of day, basically equals what she generates from the system. So it's independent of it being sunny out or not, it's just over the course of a year how much the solar panels actually generate. So in this case, it's totally, for powering her car, it is in fact zero emissions because she's getting 100% of her power from the sun for the car. So at this point, does anybody have any questions? Yes.
You know, I was looking at the roof and I was thinking about, you know, how roofs accumulate just the debris generally, and then also you're going to get the snow on the roof.
Right.
So if you're talking about having solar panels on a roof in Rochester, New York, how perfect and pristine does the roof need to be before you could put solar panels on it? And what about the accumulation of large amounts of snow in the winter? How do you maintain solar panels?
Okay. First of all, the roof itself, of course, it has to be structurally sound. You also, for a roof like this, you want to look at how old the shingles are. If they need to be replaced, obviously it's a good idea to replace the shingles before the panels go on, or when the time comes, the panels have to come off and you have to re-shingle it. As far as in this climate, for this particular roof, this roof is a 12-12 pitch, so it's fairly steep. But even on gentler sloped roofs, if the sun does come out, there is enough radiant energy to heat the panels up, and usually then the snow will slide off or melt off. Also, if you look at the entire year, between January, February, March, when you're going to get most of the snow, you're only generating probably about 12 to 15% of your total power that's generated by those panels year-round. So if there's snow up there, sure, you're going to lose a little something, but it's not going to be that significant. And like I said, if the sun does come out, generally it will melt and the snow will just slide off. Yes?
If we all drive electric cars, what's the percentage increase in output required from the power grid to keep them all running?
That's a good question. You could do some analysis, making some assumptions on the growth of electrics. Obviously out in California, that seems to be more of a concern because the grid is more stressed. And in California, in a lot of areas where there are more electric cars, a lot of the billing, they have time of day billing where there can be 4 different tiers depending on the time of day that you're using power. Most all the cars have the capability, if you're doing a charge at home, where you can program the car where it will not start to charge until, let's say, starting at midnight. So you could take advantage of the lower cost. In this area of the country, around here, we probably don't have too much to worry about because of the capacity that's around Western New York. You get down into Long Island, that area, it would definitely be an issue. They're building, NYSERDA's funding parking garage structures that the entire roof is solar panels, so they have distributed power generation within the system. But there's a lot of discussion in the standards using smart grid technology so that it can be, the loads can be balanced. Because basically the power plant, the whole design and infrastructure is for the worst peak demand. And in fact, right now, probably today, if you look at the power consumption in New York State, when you got hot, humid weather for a period of a few days, the whole system has to be designed to hit that peak. So if you can design in to the smart grid controls to charge the cars during off-peak demand times, then you're going to be below that peak demand limit. But like I say, in some areas, there is a concern because obviously the power has to come from somewhere and it's coming from the grid.
In Sweden, they've been using electric cars for quite some time now, haven't they?
Yes.
How has that been? What percentage of people are buying electric cars?
Over in Europe, I couldn't answer that. I don't know the data for that. But a lot of these technologies, especially when you're talking about renewables and the environment, a lot of those technologies were first introduced and are used quite widely in Europe. The technologies around the solar panels, the inverters. In fact, for my solar jobs, the inverters I use are actually manufactured in Austria. The solar panels, there's a German company, but a lot of the solar panel manufacturers that are offshore in Europe have established production plants in the United States. There's one German solar panel manufacturer that's in Arizona. There's a Japanese solar panel manufacturer, Sharp, that's in Tennessee. So on my systems, most all of the equipment that I get is US manufactured. But again, a lot of the technologies and advances really started in Europe on a lot of these technologies. Yes?
In the wintertime, what do you have to use electricity from the batteries to heat the car.
Yes.
Reducing range, how bad does it affect your range?
That right now is...
Say it's 10 or 15 degrees out.
Yes.
You need to de-ice the windshield at least.
Yes, that is a disadvantage with the electrics. One of the things that they all have is, call it a remote start. So if you're at home, you can precondition the car at home, even if it's parked in the driveway, not in the garage, using the electricity from your garage or whatever. So you can preheat the car, but then you would still you're still consuming some electricity to keep it up to temperature. But obviously that's one disadvantage of the electrics in a cold climate. As far as mileage, you're probably looking at a 25 to 30% reduction summer versus winter. For the Chevy Volt, if the temperature drops below 25 degrees, the way that the software is in that car, the internal combustion engine will automatically go on. So part of it for that reason, because it's so cold, so you can get heat and so forth.
If you're stuck in the middle of traffic and there's an accident up ahead in the middle of the winter, and you sit there for half an hour, you either freeze or your range goes down to next to zero, doesn't it?
Well, you aren't traveling, so you aren't going to be using any of the electricity for moving, so it's all just going to be for the heater. So if you're stuck in traffic, it's not going to be obviously consuming as much. And that's one technology I know. for at least moderately cold temperatures. Some of the car manufacturers, right now all the heaters are resistive heating, and I think some of the next generation they're actually going to put heat pumps in where they may be able to recover some of the heat either in the car systems or external, so it's not all resistive heating. It's interesting that I was reading a little bit back in 1975, those U.S. Postal Service vehicles, they were electric vehicles, but they had gasoline or some sort of fossil fuel fired heaters in those vehicles. So it was using the electric for moving them around, but keeping it warm inside. That was a completely different system that didn't use the electricity. Yes?
How long do the batteries last, and how expensive are they?
The batteries, I would guess, because they're giving an 8-year warranty, they're probably going to last you 10 years in the cars. Right now I'm hearing that it costs about $3,000 to replace, but when you go out, let's say 8 or 10 years, what's going to happen is in that same volume of space for the batteries, the actual battery size is going to shrink, the cost is going to go down, or if they use that full size, the range of the vehicle is going to go up. So the battery technology, I have no doubt, will advance to the point where the cost for replacement will go down and your ranges will go up on the vehicles.
What's the voltage of the battery?
Typically they're running about 380 volts DC. So obviously, the higher voltage, the conductors don't have to be as large in the vehicles. The cabling is well protected. All the fire departments across the country have training on what to do if they come up to an electric vehicle that's been in an accident. And whether it be electric or gas car, if there's any fuel, whether it be like battery or 15 gallons of gasoline, there's a potential for a dangerous situation in either case. So you just have to know how to deal with either vehicle if it's in an accident.
Are the batteries pretty much interchangeable between different makes of cars and stuff?
No, they aren't. They all have their own packaging and monitoring systems. The Ford Focus and the Chevy Volt, the batteries are actually liquid cooled. So there's, through the battery assembly, they remove heat through a coolant loop. The Nissan Leaf is convection cooled, is air cooled. So their technology, they've come up with a way supposedly to remove the heat just by airflow. But each one's different. They are not interchangeable. I'm guessing down the road, newer models, there's going to be other companies that might start manufacturing replacement batteries for different vehicles. Maybe ones that they say have greater performance, that sort of thing.
You get hydrogen gas from them as you charge them, like you do, if you try to charge the car?
No, because they aren't lead acid. They're primarily different, I guess, characteristics of lithium. So there's no real outgassing of the cells. But obviously under a charge and discharge, they can produce heat.
So there's no liquid in the battery at all?
No. I mean, maybe if you cut it open, there may be a pasty substance, but there's no liquid sloshing around. They're, completely sealed up.
But in the case of an accident, that pasty substance would be hazardous?
I'm really not sure. You look at the way it is, and I'm most familiar with the Volt. It's in basically this stainless steel, like armored container, and it's in the very center of the car. It's actually a T-shape, so it goes down the center console, and then it kind of branches out in the back seat, under the seat. So it's pretty well protected for crash tests and stuff. Yes?
You had mentioned that you hardly ever end up using the gasoline that you put in the car.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking about, like with my lawnmower, if you have any gas at the end of the year, you better get it out. You can't leave gas for. So what do you do about that problem?
Well, the software takes care of that in the car. So it monitors how often you're using the gas, how much is left in the tank, when you last put gas in the car. If the engine hasn't come on in 6 weeks, it runs it long enough just to warm it up, get the fluids flowing and so forth. So I suppose it doesn't turn into a fossil, it just seize up. And if it hasn't seen any gas being added in a year's time, it will force the engine on to burn it all up. So, if you don't want to waste all that gas, then you don't fill the car all the way up. The fuel system, too, the actual gas tank is pressurized, which a pressurized fuel tank will keep gas longer. And so it manages it that way. I think the engineers thought ahead what would happen. You can't leave gas in the car for too long without it being used.
Is there a safety rating, a crash rating on these electric cars?
There is. Well, I should say I don't know too much about the safety ratings other than they're subject to the same safety testing as gasoline cars. And in addition to that, there's labels on the car, and the fire departments have been trained on how to deal with situations where the cars are in accidents. But I believe the Society of Automotive and Electrical and Automotive Engineers has standards for higher voltage potentials within vehicles. Since it's more than just the 12 volts, having a higher voltage in the car, there's precautions that have to be made during construction and even maintenance and so forth. And the high voltage lines in the vehicles are clearly marked, and they're basically bright orange in the car.
If something runs into you?
Hopefully, well, nothing different than somebody running into you in a gasoline car or a diesel car or a hydrogen car.
But the battery of the Volt caught fire 3 days after the crash test. Was there a fix for that?
There's a lot of bad information out there. First of all, what had happened, they did a side impact test. The car then sat for 3 weeks in the backyard of this testing lab. They did not disconnect the battery, which they were supposed to do, and discharge it, which would be basically the equivalent of, at a crash site, removing the gasoline from the car. And GM, I think, just to address that situation, did have a recall where they put an additional structural member in the side of the car to further strengthen that area of the vehicle. But it was actually 3 weeks, and again, they didn't follow, the testing lab didn't follow what they should have done to disable the battery system. So there's not an electric vehicle out there or a gasoline vehicle, if it gets in an accident, that has the potential for fire and explosion.
Doesn't the joke go on the electric car blog that if you get into an accident and you're not willing to discharge the battery, you have 3 weeks to exit the car before you could potentially catch fire?
Yes,
So
yes.
exit within 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you leave the car within 3 weeks, you're in good shape. Okay, if there's any other questions, yes?
Do the cars have air conditioning?
Yes.
On a day like today, it's pretty interesting.
I used mine coming over here and it felt great. Yep.
How does that affect the range?
What's that?
If you have the AC on, how would that affect the range?
Not too much, nothing like the heater. You know, it's a compressor, it's an electric compressor. And it's going to affect it a little bit, but not that much. It's pretty efficient. Okay, any other? Yes.
Does this accommodate 1 or 2 cars, the station? And like, if there's like 3 cars, what do you do? Say, do you need I mean, what happens?
Well, right now, we put this in as a pilot program just to see what kind of usage there would be. That's for a single car. You can get stations for 2 cars. You can put multiple stations in. I haven't seen any fights out there yet for people saying I want to charge my car. But as time goes on and there's more electrics out there, I think whoever does put in the stations have to realize that they may have to put more charging stations in.
Is vandalism a concern? I look at those things and I know what kids are like, and I can just see ripping those wires off there and thinking it's funny, like the old payphone.
I'm sure. You know, knock on wood, it hasn't happened yet.
Some armor plating on or something.
Well, you're always still going to have, see, that's the thing, you're going to have this cord. And I haven't heard so much around here, but in more urban areas, you get some of the heavier power chargers. They'll cut these off and sell the copper because these are copper, you know, cords. Of course, like any other vandalism, maybe a way is if these are placed in parking garages, then you're going to limit who's going to be able to use them, or if you have surveillance cameras or whatever. But you know, anything out there is going to be subject to vandalism. Yes?
For the Tesla car, I heard there's like a waiting list to get a Tesla. Aren't they making them in California?
Yes.
And there's a waiting list, or do you know?
There probably is, because I think they're basically handmade. I forget what bodies they're using now, but they aren't making the bodies, they're modifying the cars.
And you know how much? They're well over 100,000?
There was the Roadster, that's being replaced by the Model S. I think the Roadster is discontinued now, and I think the price probably went down, so now it's like in the low to mid 80s for that car.
Just looked up a picture of the Fisker. What a sharp looking car.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Now, didn't they recall those Fiskers? We saw one of those in Vero Beach, Florida.
They may have recalled for different things. You know, the Chevy Volt had 3 safety recalls that one was for the battery enhancement, which I think that was probably done more just to address the concerns with that crash test. They found, I never had problems with my original charger, but they replaced the chargers because I guess they determined that there was some problem with some limited numbers. And then I think there was something, there was a check on one of the airbag mounting structure, but that was more of a routine. It would be the same. I think it also affected some other General Motors cars. So probably the charger, but I don't know. None of them seem to be really significant. It's not like it was for something where the car would just stop working or that sort of thing. Yes?
There was a movie about our government suppressed the electric car, and I know they did, and you can laugh at it, but the oil people, the people behind it, they're making a lot of money for gas and oil, the people that run things behind the scenes. And so the electric car was suppressed, I know that.
Was there a second shooter on the grassy knoll?
Yeah, this,
Republicans, call it what you want, but it's affecting you. I don't know why gas is going down now. I mean, I heard on the radio show I listened to 3 years ago, gas was, he was told what it was going to do, its program, and he was told, and that's what happened by a source. The guy died. Before he died, he said gas is going to be this, and it was. You know, so they make a lot of money from gas.
well, there's a lot of speculation out there, but who knows what's true and what's not.
I research it. I mean, people don't want to know. They put their heads in the sand so they can keep doing it.
Well, I think the reality now is that there's 4 big auto manufacturers that are making electric vehicles. There are currently, just to help development of those vehicles, there are, or I should say the purchase of those vehicles, there's tax credits out there to help that industry, as is the case with a lot of emerging technologies. So at this point, now that there's 4 major auto manufacturers making these cars, I think it's just going to keep moving forward. Yeah. Regardless of what the oil companies want to do or think they want to do. So should we go out in the parking lot and we can take a quick look? Yep. Okay, who was asking about the air conditioning? Maybe he's... Yes, as we were walking out of the building, I remote started it, so the air conditioning is on, and it's using, of course, the power from the charger. I had cracked the windows before I parked it just to keep it a little cooler. Yeah, so if you have a full charge and a full tank of gas, you can go about 375 miles. And then if you can't get to a charger, you just put gas in it. So then it just operates like a regular car. And the gasoline engine gets about 40 miles to the gallon on the highway. Yeah.
Does the gasoline engine drive through a regular transmission, or does it just generate electricity?
It just generates electricity, so it's what they call a series hybrid. So the engine powers a generator, and then if there's extra charge, it will charge the batteries, and then the electric motor. So there's no real mechanical coupling between the engine and the drive wheels. So starting with the charging station, it's a little round unit under the little birdhouse there, and it's basically all automatic. So I'll go through the sequence. If I don't unlock the car, it will beep if I pull that out. So typically if someone comes up to this charging station, this is just housed there to keep it clean. So to charge the car, you just remove this connector. And with all the electrics that are out there, the production electrics, that's a standard connector. The charging station will not apply any power to the connector until the car asks for it. There's a digital interface that sends a digital signal to the charger and says, this is what I am, you know, I'm a Chevy Volt, I need this kind of charge. And then if it satisfies the charger, then the charger will turn the electricity on to the connector.
You can't touch two electrodes and get zapped.
No, nope. So when I plug this in, so now it's not running, the car will beep. And now it's saying that it's accepting the charge. The cars are all a little bit different, but on the Volt, it's kind of hard to see in the sun, but there's like a green light on the top that indicates that it's charging. And then for the Volt, when it's done charging, that light will just blink. And I can remote start it again if I lock the doors.
That's a level 1 charger?
This is a level 2.
Oh.
Because it's a 240 volt charger. So this will actually charge at 3.3 kW. When it's plugged into this charger, it will gain about 10 to 12 miles of charge per hour for the car. You can hear the air conditioner kicking in.
The ones that you hear about being installed are all going to be level 2.
Yes, yes.
And you could plug that same plug into a, you know, if we're coming from a level 1.
Yes. The level 1 and level 2 have the same connector. Level 3 has a different kind of connector for the high voltage. Okay. We took this to Detroit. Yeah, it handles very solid on the road. It just hugs the road because the car weighs 3,700 pounds. And I'll open it up. You can kind of see inside. And it's got a fair amount of room in the back. This is the first publicly available charging station in Monroe County. Once the information came out about that, especially the people that are driving electrics, they zeroed in on this charging station real quick. And when we did the layout for this station, the clearances and distances, we made it ADA compliant, which, you know, they all should be that way. It doesn't take really that much extra work to do that. You just have to be aware of what those distances are. And like our kids or grandkids, it will be like, yeah, business as usual, you know.